Kia ora and welcome to Capability Group. Choose to Lead. I'm Annie Kennedy and I'm really excited to be bringing you a conversation with Associate Professor Selina Tusitala Marsh. Talofa, Selina. I'm having lessons.
Annie.
I'm trying to get the pronunciation right. So I'm really excited to be talking to you today. We're going to explore leadership, and first of all, just to give people a little bit of a sense of you, what I do know is that you're Associate Professor of English at Auckland University. In 2016, you got to go and deliver a poem to the Queen at Westminster Abbey called Unity, and I just love the poem. And in 2017 through to 2019, you were the first Pacific Poet Laureate in New Zealand. And it sounds like incredible adventures that you had as part of that experience. I loved the expressions. I saw you talking about being on a roller coaster that was like a cyclone and a hurricane all at the same time. And you also were recognised in the New Year's Honours at the beginning of this year. Congratulations on that as well. There's so many things. Your beautiful books, we were just talking about that a little bit earlier. Mophead was awarded the supreme winner at the New Zealand Book Awards for children and young adults last year. And Mophead, which is really how your difference makes a difference. And not only did you write it, but you also illustrated it. Like that wasn't enough, right? And then like that wasn't enough, along comes number 2. So we have Mophead 2 as in TU as in stand, is that right? So standing up for yourself. And that was more or less based on going to visit the Queen and to share your poem. And the other thing that I'm fascinated as well is Tusitala from Tusitala Marsh means storyteller in Samoan as well, which is pretty cool. I think it would be kind of nice for you to perhaps give the better version of your story, Selina. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what's got you to where you are at the moment? What are some of the key moments for you?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, ma lole soifua, malelangi e mama. Greetings to you. I acknowledge the spaces between us. I acknowledge the divine space that holds us in place, and send out blessings to everyone watching this and everyone involved in this in order to capture these really important conversations, or what they call in Tongan and Samoan circles, this tala noa, this open-ended conversation as we kind of think about what it means to lead, and choosing to lead, and overcoming and walking through challenges. So I think I always start as a pivotal moment in my life with my first year of doing a PhD in the English department at the University of Auckland. And I was researching the first 5 Pacific women poets that nobody had ever heard of, let alone me. And I was quite shocked and disgusted, actually, that it took a PhD for me to realize that as a Pacific woman in Oceania, in New Zealand, that there were my foremothers that had gone before me, that had not been taught in schools, was not easily accessible in the literary history. And so I thought, well, if not me, then who? And embarked on this PhD. But you mentioned my name, Tusitala, which means storyteller, and it comes from my Tuvaluan grandfather, who was named after the event of visitation from Robert Louis Stevenson around the Pacific, around the then Alice Islands, as Tuvalu was named. And as oral people are wont to do, we record our histories and we record our knowledge through orality. And so we name people, places and spaces after these historic events. That's the way that we keep our records. And as is tattooing, right? As is the inked symbolic stories on our skin. And so I thought that's a beautiful legacy to have been born in. To go from Robert Louis Stevenson, white canonical male author, to finding my own voice as a younger Pacifica woman, scholar, poet. So I wrote this poem in 1996 on the way to my first international conference in Honolulu. Tusitala, teller of tales that I never heard till yesterday, born away for another life. Today, the tale I tell is mine, theirs, yours, some more of Sa more of my sacred center. Today, the tale I tell will book its way through tongued histories, sanctioned mysteries, spaces of silence, timeless lives. Tala Tusi, tell the book, word the spirit of brown, in theory and creativity, we make our sound renown. And that poem, penned in 1996, has stayed with me because it tells me where I'm from, where I am today, and where I'm going tomorrow. So it's one of those aspirational, inspirational poems that have kind of like is at the core of my identity. And this is the kind of work that I help, you know, with Capability Group. I help Pacifica leaders in the corporate and not and non-governmental spaces as well. I help them find that through line, their own leadership poem, because that was such a powerful tool for me.
So it becomes quite grounding for you, it sounds like. I read somewhere that you like to sit in trees and find your space. And hearing you describe that experience from that poem sounds like that was such a grounding experience for you, that whatever comes your way, and you know, we talked before about, you know, challenges that shape us, that you kind of, it enables you to kind of wave and wobble but hold your space. And is that what you're seeing in the work that you're doing in the Pacifica Leaders Program, for example, with Capability Group, where you're helping them find that in their own poetry? What is your observation? What's your insights been? And kind of walking alongside.
Our cultural roots, ROOTS, are our cultural roots, ROUTES. They provide ways of us to navigate these urban spaces, these diasporic spaces. Many of us are part this and part that and part this, right? So we just use those cultural roots to weave in the multiple strands of who we are and our identity, to enrich ourselves and our way of being in the world. And for too long, it's felt that there's been this negative deficit way of looking at, in the Pacific community, those of us who are part rather than full, right? So there's this term afakasi, which is the transliteration of the English term half caste, which was viewed really derogatively back in the day. Now it's this term of empowerment that, yeah, I'm multiple strands of identities, and I will claim that Scottish strand, that Fred strand, that Tuvaluan strand, and that Samoan strand all at the same time to, you know, for me to increase my accessibility into other worlds. So one of the takeouts from the Growing New Leaders program is that people get to be exactly who they are in their spaces. Because oftentimes it's like, well, I was born in New Zealand, or I don't speak Tongan, so I don't feel like a real Tongan. It's like, well, actually, when we give ourselves permission to explore our cultural identities exactly as we do, then we just stand in more power, you know, rather than letting others shut us down or kind of cordon us off in little tight identity boxes. That's what poetry does for me.
What are you noticing as the impact on that with people that are you're walking along, helping them to discover this? What are you seeing coming out the other side with this?
What we're overwhelmed with is emotion, actually, is tears, is that this is the first time things like this have been discussed in the corporate setting. And for many Pacific leaders, it's the first time it's been discussed at all. There's a lot of shame couched in not being Pacific Island enough, because we, you know, some of us don't have access to language or cultural kind of manifestations like dance, or they're not in the traditional church. Church is often a core cultural, you know, hive way of knowing, doing, and being. And approaching their culture through poetry gives people permission to find their voice. You know, one of my anchoring lines from the great late Maya Angelou, African-American poet, former US laureate, is, a bird doesn't sing because it has the answer. A bird sings because it has a song. And so it's like, I actually have that taped to my office door at uni, and it puzzles students because it's like, well, we're here to find the answers, we're here to pass, we're here to succeed. And I'm like, well, yes, that, and I'm here to help you find your song. I just want to see you and recognize what that unique thing is that you have that you can contribute to our, to our study on Pacific literature or creative writing or whatever it is we're doing. Yeah.
So much of what you're describing at the moment just implies huge vulnerability, though, doesn't it? It's willing to sit into that space of uncertainty and unknown, and really exposing myself in a way that I haven't perhaps felt before. And how have you navigated that yourself in the past?
Yeah. That's a great question. I just, I encourage my students, my leaders, to thrive in their discomfort zone. But the only way I can say that with any kind of integrity is to do it myself. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier about Mophead, this graphic mini memoir that just came out of nowhere and like swept through the awards. I hadn't even known about, really thought about it being part of the Children's Book Awards last year. And what I was led by line, I was led by the creative line and the visual line. And I wanted to revisit a childhood passion of mine of just doodling, of just drawing. And when I storyboarded this Mophead story, that was based on the fact that, yes, I was New Zealand Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019, the fifth woman, the first Pacifica woman, the second youngest. And it was like, why is it that I really didn't know that much about the New Zealand Poet Laureateship? And I work in an English department. So for the average Kiwi out there, how are they supposed to know the story? And how are they supposed to appreciate the beautiful, unique, and rich way that Aotearoa New Zealand nourishes their poets laureate? And so Mophead is a children's story, an all ages children's story that was meant to take that story out there. And then it became this other thing. It just became how I, like my own story, and how I leaned into the vulnerability. I leaned into that vulnerable space. Like Mophead, being taunted as a mophead used to be the bane of my existence. And when I showed the first draft to an old school friend, she was like, are you sure, Sal? I mean, to title a book after the name that used to make you cry, are you sure? And I was like, I've absolutely reclaimed it. It's now a term of endearment or affection. And the way that other people have responded to it, because it speaks to the heart of their own difference, when it used to be kind of that soft underbelly, vulnerable point, and they've turned it, it's helped them see how actually maybe my red hair is my power, or maybe my, height or whatever is my power. It's just been an amazing space of transformation, but I can only encourage others to be in that space of vulnerability if I'm doing it myself.
And power is such a great choice of word too. There's just sense of power and empowering through the story that you have been courageous enough to share. And it's so beautiful and it's so funny. Like, I was thinking about, what do I think of when I think of Selina before I think of energy and enthusiasm and passion and creativity and the courage to be those things, right, in a world that doesn't necessarily reward that in the same way or recognize that in the same way. And I think it comes along with the soundtrack of laughter. There's just this beautiful, wonderful energy about you that I feel like you have this wonderful ability to tell powerful stories that reflect not always the pretty things back at us, right? But in a way that's so digestible and acceptable and enough to push us a little, does that make sense? What I'm
I
trying to
love that. Yeah, no, I love that, because when I was kickboxing, like I kickboxed for 7 years after my mother died, and it was a way to process through my body the grief that I felt at her death. And in a strange way, it also connected me with my Tuvalu side in terms of the farewell dance that we performed at the funeral. And that kind of married into this embodied movement. But my trainer, who, like, we were thinking, do I enter a tournament? Do I actually get to really kick someone's head? And I wanted to, and he came up, I said, I'll be the Samoan. I think I said, I want to be the Samoan savage. I want to like totally embody that stereotype and then bust it open. And my trainer was like, actually, you're the smiling assassin. That's what you are. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That's really cool, because of exactly what you'd said in terms of opening people up through laughter, through humor, through kind of the self-effacing way I have in approaching a story. But then actually mid-laughter, they kind of realize, oh, that hits. Yeah.
it's such an interesting tension, right? That you create that comes from such a genuine intent as well. And I think I'm kind of curious as well, and you look at the last year and the challenges around leadership and adaptability and agility, and we were talking before about not only have you just written your book Mophead, but you went, oh yeah, I'll illustrate it. I'm an illustrator from way back, I'll do that. So there's moments where you've just gone and you kickbox and you do this and you do that and you do poems to Barack Obama and you go to Westminster Abbey and you travel the world and you represent so much in the stories that you tell and the way that you open others around the world at the same time. When you think about that adaptive, agile sort of leadership, what's your own learning been around that?
Well, so much of my teaching and my research and my performance is all outward focused, right? It's all about reaching mass audiences and empowering them to kind of go within themselves to find their own voice and their own story. And so what the engine behind that is this quiet, what Glennon Doyle writes about in her book Untamed, this quiet knowing, and that it all begins with just being still and paying attention to who you are made to be, who you were born to be. And the decision to illustrate Mophead didn't come from I think I'm going to go do this. It actually came from I've always had a drawn line as well as a written line. And where did I get that love from? Oh, it came from Spike Milligan's Bad Jelly the Witch. It was the first book that I can remember, the first and one of the few gifts that my father gave me. So the book had huge sentimental value, but I remember opening it up and realizing that he'd drawn the words as well and the pictures. And something internally just vibrated with that. And I thought, I want to do that. And I remember as a child writing and drawing my own books, but because I had such exacting standards, because even back then at 8, I was a perfectionist, I never finished any of the books. And Mophead is actually my first ever drawn, illustrated story that I've finished. And one of the takeouts I learned from that was when I came to drawing Mophead's hair, and I was drawing these perfect spirals. And then I just thought, you know what? That's not me. That's not Mophead. And I scribbled out the spirals to start again. And then I realized, oh my gosh, it's the scribbles that are her head. It's this chaotic mess. And I learned that mistakes are made for making, that you cannot make without making mistakes. And that mistakes, rather than being, as I learned growing up through school, that, you want to avoid making mistakes, actually they're all part and parcel of the process. And so I've got a number of learnings that I love to pull out when I visit primary schools, because I'm talking to me at 8, and I want to free up that little girl at 8. So just keep producing, just keep creating. Don't wait for 41 years later to finally finish something of that nature. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of sad, though, that by 8 there's such huge expectation and pressure on ourselves that it has to be perfect, and then you have students coming into your office that feel like they have to have the answer, and that the messiness, we don't have permission to go there. We don't have permission to go to the let's test it, try it, make a mess, unfinished things, explore. We just don't have permission for that. And the way you talk about your own journey, you make it all sound like it's the easiest, most effortless thing, right? To be able to just be yourself, be still, try this. But it's actually not that easy. It's really not that easy. And just to hear you talking about before of just being still in our current context that we live in is really challenging.
And I think I've worked out the best way that I can be still is to move. So I do a lot of bush running, like Waiheke Island. I was part of the Waiheke Island Trail Tribe, so we just run in the bush, and I realized I'm one of those still movers, right? And I can be still doing yoga. I just do yoga online, and I can be still while walking, and still while in the ocean, and and also being still when being still. It's that gift that I encourage my students of creative writing just to pay attention, not just to the world around them, but to their own lives. We're so used to just kind of skipping and trying to reach what's out there because it's shinier and it's brighter. But actually, the unique, only they see the world the way they see it. Only they write the way that they can write. Even though all those great big themes of love, death, grief, lust, they've all been written about. The only unique contribution they can make to the world of creative writing is their own voice.
It's bringing that song back in again. It's finding their song. It's so beautiful. That's really going to stick with me today. And I think, and I see it in the work that I do, just how hard it is for people to be present and open and vulnerable enough to allow themselves to see it for themselves first. But it's such power. I keep coming back to that word powerful, but it is really powerful work, but also beautiful. I think the theme that we have for this series of conversations is choose to lead. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I didn't choose it. I'm like, and I guess one of the milestones was when I was doing my master's, and Albert Wendt and Witi Ihamaira called me into their office at the English department, and they said, your grades are stellar. You need to go on to do a PhD. We're not going to be here forever. You need to step into this space to ensure that Māori and Pacific literature is taught in the largest Polynesian city in the world, in the largest university. And I sat there going, I just had no plan. I was like, I thought I'd go to teachers training college. I thought I might be a vet. I didn't know. I had no plans. And yeah.
Like you come across like you were so clear from, like the moment when Sam Hunt came into school and you went, I want to be that. I want to be the person with the crazy hair who writes poems. And
I didn't want to be an academic.
So many moments of clarity for you. What was that?
I didn't want to be an academic.
Oh, right.
No, I was at uni. I was like, I don't see myself reflected here, and I'm out. But because I did my master's thesis on the road films of Whoopi Goldberg, and I came across my thesis that I'd written in 1996, and the introduction was all about hair. It was like I connected with Whoopi Goldberg because of her hair. That was the closest approximation to my own cultural identity that I saw in popular culture in 1996. But that opened up this huge space for research. Like, where are our Indigenous, oceanic, Māori and Pacific women, writers, thinkers, and, are scholars. They're there. We just don't know about them. And so when Al and Witty said, you need to do this, being a good Samoan daughter, you don't question your elders, you just do it. And so before I knew it, the choice was made for me. But what I will say is I then had to keep choosing to step into that leadership space. And by leadership space, I mean, there was nobody in front of me and there was certainly no one behind me. And if it didn't start with me, then it wouldn't begin at that time and place. So yeah, the choice has been ongoing. And even now, being like, I call myself a Pacifica poet scholar with the hyphen in the middle, because that hyphen is a bridge. And I make sure that the critical and creative bridge remains in place. It's core to my being at uni and my work. If it's not, then I will leave and find something else, you know. At the moment, strategically being who I am at university is the most empowering thing I can do for myself, my communities, and beyond, you know. But it is a strategic choosing of how to be in that space and to thrive in that space. You know, I went to a talanoa with emerging Pacific academics a few weekends ago, and the session was called How to Survive Academia. And I was like, no. Let's not talk about survival anymore. Let's talk about thrival. Like, here are my 9 tips on how to do it. And so that's how I led my session.
Is there a huge sense of responsibility, kind of gently resting on your shoulders?
Gently, Annie, gently.
And also the work you do going out into schools and talking to the 8-year-old girls with your, you know, and the 11-year-old girls and going out there and being someone, you know, I can see someone like me, or I can see someone who has chosen to accept themselves for, but maybe being not like someone else. Do you know what I mean? That's
absolutely. Yeah. No, there's no gentle, light resting on the shoulders ever. You know, it's a heavy mantle of representation. But I found a lightness of being in terms of how I wear it now. Like, for the first maybe 7 years, it was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to do everything plus this service? That
is it like being the 8-year-old trying to draw between the lines again, have to do it in a way that's of a certain level of expectation rather than just bring myself to it, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. And now we colour in the lines, outside of the lines, all around, in the margins. You know, I mean, I found a way to strategically work my research, my service, and my creative outputs, my teaching with it. So, for example, you know, for the past 8 years, I've sat on the former New Zealand Book Council to look after, in part, the school outreach program. I marry that with the school outreach service work at university. I marry that with the research that I do in terms of how I want my work to stay relevant to kids. So it's strategically juggling these balls. But man, Annie, if I didn't have laughter lightening the load, it would crush me, I think. One of my mentors uses the phrase to flock and flow. You know, I've got these, the ngongo sina on my knuckles, the navigational seabird, the tern on my knuckles. And she reminds me, those are about flocking with those who lift you higher, you know, in terms of air currents, who help you like glide along, who both guide you and follow you. And she said, and just flow around those people or those things that don't. Like, don't get bogged down, don't get heavy with them, just flow around them.
So I feel like the flocking, I'm being lifted through just being in the space with you and being able to just hear your stories, and I'm hugely appreciative of that. And I just want to thank you for making the time to have a conversation with us with Capability Group.
You're welcome.
The lead campaign. Thank you for the partnership we have with you and the fantastic work that you do, and for just the beautiful energy that you bring. Thank you so much. Mā te wā.
Hey, tatai.
Anything else anybody wants to say before I freeze?
Thanks, Annie.